So you have made a beautiful quilt, you have created a gorgeous quilt top, you've laid it up, you've done all the quilting, and now you are ready to bind it. And your question to yourself is, which grain line should I cut my binding on? Let me see if I can help. Now, as a general rule, if the quilt has straight edges, I cut my binding on the straight grain parallel to the selvage. And if you have a piece of fabric that does not have the selvage on it anymore, you can find out which grain line that is by stretching it. And if you stretch one straight grain, the one that is parallel to the selvage will stretch less than the one that runs at right angles to the selvage. And in some fabrics that is very obvious. So when I stretch this particular fabric, I think you can probably see that stretches really quite a lot and this not so much. So that is the selvage and that is across from selvage to selvage. The reason for that is that often the stronger threads run parallel to the selvage because they've got to withstand the weaving that goes between those individual threads. So if it's a straight edged quilt and I've got sufficient fabric, I will cut parallel to the selvage. There are fabrics that are of such good quality that there is little difference in the stretch from the selvage to the cross straight grain. And so in that sense, you might manage to get away with cutting across from selvage to selvage. You know, if you only had short lengths like this, I would have much better usage if I cut across from selvage to selvage. But I do think you need to be careful, and it might be a good idea to cut the plies singly because you don't want to get slightly off grain, because that can create what's called roping when you get that little bit of twist to a binding as you sew it on. But what you can see is that this really good, strong, straight grain isn't going to stretch. So I'm not in any danger of, when I apply my binding to my quilt, stretching the binding and then kind of pulling in the edges. But what if the quilt is round or it has some curves to the edges? Well, a straight cut strip of binding is not going to mould around those shapes. So in that case, I do cut the binding on the true 45-degree bias. And if I just stretch this, you can see how much more stretchy that is and how it is going to mould around those edges. Okay, what I would say to you is, in both cases, whether it is a straight edge or a wavy edge, what I always do is I cut about an 8-inch length of binding of the width that I think I need, and I sew it onto the actual quilt with a big stitch, a long stitch length, to check that I've got the correct width and it all goes over and fits as it should before I cut my yardage or meterage, which could be an awful lot. You don't want to have it slightly too thick or too thin. And with a bias cut binding, you may find you need to cut your binding about 1/8 of an inch or so, maybe a little bit more, wider than you normally do, because it does, just because of its nature, stretch a bit, and so it tends to get a little bit narrower. Okay, now again, make sure that you get the true 45-degree bias cut. If you are off by 5-10 degrees, again, you will get that roping effect when you come to sew your binding on, and it will not lay beautifully and will not lay flat. So straight cut for straight edge quilts, bias for bias cut, check it first. And another little tip is, the higher the quality of the fabric, the better it will be in use. So if it's a bed quilt that's going to be on the bed a lot and you're going to be washing it, those of you who made quilts lots of years ago and still have them on beds, you will be aware that the binding can wear away and start to fray. So a high quality, high thread count cotton poplin type of fabric is a really good choice for utility quilts. So I hope that helps you decide. No rules, make some little samples, try it out, see what works for you, be guided by your particular quilt and the fabric that you are going to bind it with, and good luck. And I hope your bindings are beautiful and flat and they never wear out.